My name is Ruth Reichard. Wrote a book called Blood and Steel, which is about Ryan White, the AIDS crisis, and the city of Kokomo, Indiana. Well, I've always wanted to be a writer, but I used to think for a long time that a writer was someone who did that full time and made a living from it and lived somewhere on a beach that was cloudy and moody and had lots of deep thoughts. And then, of course, I had a life intervene, and I was lucky enough to go back to graduate school after several decades in the law profession. And I got a PhD in US history. My friends all thought I was crazy. Like, why, as a grown adult, would you want to go back to school and have to write papers? I've always known I've had books in me that are ready to come out. And so this is the first one, I hope, of several. But this started out as my dissertation for my doctorate in US history. I started the project looking at how do cities respond to outbreaks of disease and how has that changed over time. And my last case study was going to be Kokomo and Ryan White. When I went up to Howard County to just kind of poke around the Historical Society and look at what they had, I found out that Kokomo's third largest employer, Continental Steel, closed during the same time that Ryan White was battling to get back into public school. And so if you look at Kokomo, a city, as a living entity, it was enduring two mortal wounds at that time. One was economic, with deindustrialization and losing thousands of jobs, both blue collar, white collar, and all of the ancillary jobs that were supported by the Continental Steel Mill. And then the other mortal wound was to Kokomo's image, because the narrative that the national and international media crafted about Kokomo, I ended up with my dissertation, several drafts, and you have an advisor and a committee of very learned historians who have themselves written books. So they help you get through the dissertation. But there is an art to taking a dissertation which is written for an audience of historians and turning that into a book. And I knew I wanted my book to be accessible. To do that involved shortening it and kind of figuring out what the essential elements of my narrative were. That helped me edit it. And it's so worrisome to me, because that story, you could not walk past a magazine stand in an airport or a doctor's office or a dentist's office in the 80s and even early to mid 90s without seeing Ryan White's face on a magazine cover. And to think that something that was so important and so much the subject of national and international discussion could vanish, to me, that makes the book more important. Just like Continental Steel, if you go up to Kokomo, where that big, huge campus was, you would never know there was a steel mill there. It's green grass and solar panels. And entire neighborhoods have been torn down because of the environmental remediation that had to be done from the contamination. So it's very dramatic how those stories, those places, those people are just gone, totally gone. I have never been part of a writing community. I was a part of my cohort at IU Bloomington when we were all writing our dissertation at the same time, but I chose to go it alone. And I think part of that was my demographics, having a family, having a full-time job. I needed my precious free time for writing, not for going to a group and talking about writing, but actually doing it. I was very motivated. I've always been a self-starter and internally driven. And I paid attention when my teachers in grad school talked about writing, because some of them also had families and children, as I did. So I listened very intently to how they found time to write and what they did and what they considered a good amount of writing for a day. They were very open to me. So in that sense, Indiana did support me. I mean, I can't say enough about the Children's Museum. They have a lot of materials from Ryan White and the White family that are not on display. And it's not necessarily cataloged or digitally accessible. And so when I shared why I was there and why I was interested in their vast collection of correspondence, all the cards and letters and postcards and greeting cards, everything that Ryan White and his family had received in the 80s and 90s, they were so good to me. Same thing, the courthouse up in Frankfort, Indiana, in Clinton County, which is where Ryan White's lawsuit was moved away from Howard County. They still have big boxes of things. So, every place I went, when I said, this is who I am, this is why I'm here, this is what I would like to see, they welcomed me. And I thought, they could have chosen to be defensive and small and unwelcoming, and they were not. They opened their door and just said, here everything is. And so in that sense, every place I went in Indiana was welcoming to me. One of my professors, I'll never forget this, said she felt like if she got 45 minutes of solid writing with no let up, that was a good day. And if she was able to have more than 1 hour, if she got 45 minutes out of every hour. And some days I would sit and I'd have my research lined up and I would look and think, how am I going to organize this into a coherent narrative? And there were some days where I got 1 page in 45 minutes, or sometimes even 1 paragraph, or I'd start with what I wrote the day before and think, after sleeping on it, I can think of a better way to organize this, and so it was very slow and painstaking. And so that's what I did. And it was, once I got everything written, then I would spend my Sunday afternoons writing to editors. And, that was another whole process of trying to find a publisher. And it didn't really fit within the purely academic press. It didn't really fit within the purely big name commercial press. So it was a little bit like threading a needle or catching lightning in a bottle. And I thought, I'm not going to give up, because I feel like this is too important to let it go and let it disappear. I think the value of nonfiction books like mine are, you keep seeing over and over again how relevant the stories are and how relevant the history is. Because I gave a talk about this book to a group of lawyers and paralegals for the Coalition for Court Access a couple of years ago. And I talked to them and framed my book about the importance of the legal system and the justice system in ways that you might not think were important if you first think about Ryan White, deindustrialization, a city losing its steel mill, having that go bankrupt and be a Superfund site. But, Ryan White would not have been able to attend school without a legal system, without a system of laws and advocates to help him be heard and have his day in court. Being recognized by the Indiana Authors Awards has been so meaningful to me because this is my first book of what I hope will be several. And it has given me a statewide audience that I feel I would not have had. I hear from professors in other parts of the state. I hear from public television stations in other parts of the state. This week, I just heard from a library in the northern part of the state that these are all places that want to hear about my book and want to have me come and talk with them. And, that, as I said, is invaluable because when you're a new author and just beginning, you don't usually have an agent who can do that publicity work for you. And so it's been very helpful.